The lights were bright near Joanna's closed eyes, her throat dry and cracked when she heard a calming voice coming from over to her left. "Anne seems to have made an excellent recovery." She turned her head to where the voices were coming from, opening her mouth to speak, but no discernible words came out. Then, she tried to open her eyelids, which were heavy and tired. "Hello," said the voice, which had turned out to be a nurse on shift, reassuring her. "Joanna Lucas, right? You need something?" And it had been like that for most of the 2 days she was at the hospital at Newtown, nurses and doctors checking on her, talking a difficulty. Especially with the police. The police. It was true they were not like the police at home, their manner very different, more direct and upfront, but she had answered the questions they had of her to the best of her ability, which was not much. Joe remembered not a lot, and could only be sure about some of the events in the run-up to her going into the building, about her still being on site so late at night, about what she did for a living, where she lived. It turned out that it was a clear-cut case. Steve Silverman had been the man in league with Nathan Daniels, money had changed hands, and Steve had been the man who had run from the reception block. He had also been the man who had come back for Joanna and had got her out from the blaze just in time. Not so lucky for Nathan, the policeman had explained Joe, when it was clear she remembered none of it, and Steve's sentence would be reduced because of his actions both towards her, his attempt to rescue Nathan Daniels, and the company. He had tried to sabotage the blaze by tipping his fuel container out before he went into the reception building and had run off to call the police. "Well, I hope you get well, Miss Lucas," the sergeant said kindly. "Going home soon?" Joanna could just about nod. "We won't need you to testify, I have enough here, as Silverman has admitted guilt." "Oh, okay then," said Joe, her brow creasing. "Don't worry," said the man, conspiratorially, "the doctors have told me that your company is taking care of the medical bill." Again, unlike home. People didn't know how lucky they were to have the NHS. All hail Bevan. "And, what about?" She rubbed her head. "Exxon." The cop shook his head. "We are still investigating." And then, another day passed and she was told she could go home. Home. Wherever that was. She didn't want to think about it. By the sounds of it, Joe had been lucky to have got out alive from the explosion and the fire at Continental's reception building, but now, 4 days after the incident, Kathy Allen being the one person who had come to see her, sorting her out with clothes, personal items, her handbag, which had been found on site and had still contained her purse, mobile phone and keys, and had had with her a long, girly talk, including the fact that she is the talk of the company. She had seen no one else. They weren't even that close. The most she and Kathy had done was to have talked about their children, and she had a chat about where she could get certain things in town, what Target was, and what Walgreens sold. There had been an obvious lack of Chandler Bing. Which is why Joanna, having resigned herself to the fact that she would have to find somewhere to go for the last 5 days of her time at the company, still wondering as she waited for her taxi in the discharge lounge, was gobsmacked to see the man waiting for her by the entrance as she walked gingerly out. "You didn't think I'd let you come out on your own now, did you?" he said, taking her bag. When Joe just stared, saying nothing, he added, "Seems like you're a hero." Joe didn't follow him when he made to walk across the car park, and she remained standing at the entrance, watching him take her bag 50 yards before he came back over to her. "What's wrong?" he asked, frowning. "Look, I'm sorry I never got to visit you. I had to sort out my car and go to the hospital myself. Bob Samuels wanted me in to talk about things, you know? Out office is completely destroyed. Well, not completely, but..." Joe said nothing for a moment, considering the events that had led up to that moment. A fortnight ago he had changed, become colder and less open. He had insulted her to his work colleagues, one of whom had been involved in the destruction of the company along with her head of department. He had got drunk, and driven out to find her. He had made her want the days to pass quickly till she could go home. "Are you coming back with me, English?" "Yes," replied Joe, then added, "and then, we need to talk." $888,888,888. You, a big hero, eh? You made CNN. Joey Tribbiani's voice was full of excitement as she listened to him on the telephone. I made what? Joanna's phone had gone when they had just got back to the apartment. Chandler had apologized for the fact they hadn't got any groceries and had asked if she were all right to stay there while he popped out for an hour to Newtown. On the news. Joey clarified. They don't say your name but they mention Continental and a massive explosion there. Listen, he broke off from the phone, and the line went crackly. Joe could hear some voices in the background, then Joey said, I'll get a little closer to the TV, the report's on now, listen. Joe couldn't really hear much, but she told Joey she could. He then asked her how she was doing. It was lucky she had not gone to bed or she would never have heard her phone ring. All right, considering, said Joanna, mildly, and then felt her voice break up, swallowing to compose herself when she spoke the words that her mind was trying to keep from her as a nebulous cloud at the back of her cerebellum. That could have been me, Joey, she said. I know, he said, kindly. But you gotta think, it wasn't. Chandler got you out, you got to the hospital. Joe paused as she ran the sentence through her mind as she sat down uncomfortably on the sofa. Some bruising, and to take it easy, her discharge nurse had told her. And her throat had been damaged by the smoke, so to avoid talking at length. So perhaps she shouldn't have been talking so much on the phone, perhaps she should have just thanked Joey there and then and put the phone down. Chandler didn't get me out, Joey, she said, at length, not doing the sensible thing in all circumstances, one of them being not resting her voice. Some guy who was in it with Daniels came back and got me out. Oh? He did come to get me from work that night after I'd been working late, she said, feeling her mind being relieved of the weight it had been carrying. Oh? That's probably what he meant, Joey replied, diplomatically. So you're back at Marshall, huh? No, that was blown up by terrorists, she said, and Chandler and I had a talk on the way back after New Year's and we agreed I would move in. Oh, right. Joey's voice was impassive. So, that night, he came to bring you back to his place? But he was drunk, Joey, she cut in, a little shrilly, putting her hands to her head as part of her mind began to shout at her to shut up now. But he doesn't drink, does he? I can't help you, Joanna, said Joey, perhaps you should speak to him? Yes, she agreed. And you take care now, hero, he added, wishing her well before hanging up. Jo closed her eyes, leaning her head against the sofa, closing her eyes and not opening them even after Chandler had got back with some groceries and had begun to make breakfast. 88,888,888. Had there not been a knock at the door late that afternoon, then it would have been likely that Joanna may have slept right through that evening and night. But there had, and it had taken all of Jo's willpower to drag herself out of the realms of semi-consciousness to answer. Sir! She exclaimed, stroking back her just-got-up hair through her fingers and wondering whether she ought to ask Bob Samuels to wait while she got something half-decent on. May I come in? He asked, his large, round face forming into that familiar, reassuring smile of his. Jo nodded. And you're well? Bob asked, after Joanna had asked him to sit and he had politely refused a drink from the selection she'd offered. I have some bruising, and a sore throat, she said, waving in its direction, and the CEO of Continental nodded in sympathy. I'm sorry to drop by unannounced, he continued, leaning forward towards her, and I can see I have just woken you. I wanted to tell you in person how grateful we all are for your quick thinking action preventing any further damage than was already done. Jo watched Bob's face contort as he spoke to praise her, and she nodded along, only half listening. So, he concluded after a short time, it would be good for us to reward you for what you did. I'm applying for a project manager job at Codrilla, I just need a reference, said Jo, immediately, her features betraying her sudden interest in the conversation again. Bob Samuels fell silent. Oh no, that had done it. Joanna screamed at herself wordlessly. I dared to ask for a reference, I asked too much, clearly. And then the CEO of Continental, giving one more look at his deputy project manager of engineering, beginning to laugh, big, hearty Father Christmas laughing, and kept on laughing. When Jo couldn't stand attention anymore, she felt herself ask testily through the beginning of a headache, may I ask why you are laughing? I feel, under the circumstances, that I should get one. I did work hard on this project. I was laughing, he said, still the ebbing of a laugh in his cheeks, because, if you will excuse me, Mrs. Lucas, it seems such a trivial thing you ask for, don't you want, say, money? Promotion? Well, I'd like to make sure I am paid my wages in full for the month. And the reference will help with my getting promotion within Quadrilla. There. She'd said it. And with that, sat down on Chandler's sofa, steeling herself not to back down on the wages, even if she had spent 3 days in hospital, and no deductions. Bob Samuels smiled. Yes, of course. And we will be paying for your flight home. It has been a nasty business, Mrs. Lucas, and the CIA are looking into any involvement from our friends at Exxon, although I am sure they will find none. I am grateful to you. I have had a certain Chandler bang at my door, insisting you be recognized for, amongst other things, the Westbury Raw. Joanna felt her mouth fall open. Is this true? Yes, sir, it is, she replied, truthfully, conscious of the fact that she was so badly dressed she was talking to her boss's boss about her work. So, then, he bent towards her, looking grave, I am afraid your reference is out of the question. But, sir, unless, he continued, you take the position of engineering project manager for the remainder of your time with us. Now, that will be something to put on your resume. Joanna felt a warmth spread across her body, starting from her chest. Of course she would take the job. It would put her head and shoulders above everyone else. Although I don't think you'll need it, Bob added, my secretary called Nick Davis's secretary and recommended you without exception. He waited patiently as the news sank in. Joanna felt her face crumple, in disbelief, wanting to hug him, but remembered just in time to remain professional. Instead, she took his unproffered hand all the same. Thank you, sir, Joanna said, standing up, her body aching, but her mind not caring. No, thank you, he said, getting to his feet too. You should have had that award at Christmas, not Daniel's. We wish to celebrate your success as an exchange worker. We owe you our business, Joanna Lucas, we owe you everything. If I am up to it, may I begin my new job tomorrow? She asked, her eyes sparkling. When you do return, and yes, you may, if you feel you can, you must present your version of events to the board. The police may not need you, but that we have had a discussion with you, the insurance company, however. I understand, said Jo, nodding, though she felt nervous about the board. But, before she could discuss anything more, Jo asked, Sir, there is something else. Yes. Pressed the large-built chief executive officer when she had not elaborated for a good minute. I was staying, for most of my time here, in a caravan in Marshall. The trailer park. Yes, nodded Samuels, a nasty business. It's in ruins. Yes, exactly, said Jo, getting to the point. I was grateful for the accommodation being good value, but I knew that I wasn't going to be there indefinitely. The trailers are being replaced. You needn't worry about the people living in Marshall. Rebuild Marshall? Asked Jo, aghast, thinking about the dirt roads, which were not safe to walk along the minute dusk arrived until well after dawn, how people were harassed in broad daylight, young children could not walk the streets, very young vulnerable teenage girls had been approached by large gangs of men, one had been murdered. We have business to pursue. A lot of people are going to get to keep their jobs because of you, he added. They will be grateful of the work. But the trailers ... The area, Jo interrupted, it's not safe for families, young girls, little children. Why, you have a daughter yourself, sir, imagine not being able to let her go out for milk for fear of having someone harassing her every time. Cars tear around the place, and while the families look after their young children, one day I can see a horrible accident happening. So, Joe took a deep breath. Take anything you might have wanted to have given me. Make that place suitable for people, said Joe. Can you do that? You are very forthright in your views, Mrs. Lucas. But I hear your concerns. Leave this matter with me and I will look into the security of my workers. Keeping them safe and healthy means I get a better quality workforce. Like Cadbury, nodded Joe, the words under her breath being caught by Bob Samuels. Cadbury? Joseph Cadbury. A chocolate maker near where I grew up. And others like him during the Victorian era. Built houses for his workers, built parks and entertainments for them. And he got more work out of them when he did. And, you leave us in 3 days, he clarified. Joe nodded. Then here. He handed her the first-class tickets from Slint, change at JFK for a flight back to London Heathrow. I can't accept this. She felt her mouth say as she stared down at the ticket. When he said he'd be paying for her flight home, she never imagined this. You will, Mrs. Lucas, his rounded tones reverberated around the apartment, smiling. That is an instruction from CEO to project manager. Goodbye. I'll leave you now, I am sure you need more rest than you let on. His hand was on the edge of the door frame before Joanna spoke again. May I just say, sir, that there are several reasons why I did not want to come here in September. I needed to stay at home with my family to look after them. For one, I would not be near my husband, who is being cared for in what is now the end of his life, and risk never seeing him again. But had it not been for you, and Mr. Stevens, embodying the principles that you have on your website. What I mean to say is, Continental is, as you say, friendly, family-orientated, a community. And I want to say that. Yes, you are. I look forward to hearing about your newborn villa at Marshall, and I wish you well with Westbury. Then we will see you tomorrow, Mrs. Lucas, said Bob Samuels, his hand out, which Joe took. We have a temporary building where the front offices once stood, though engineering is still as it was. As project manager, you will report to Jeff Stevens at 8 a.m. Yes, sir. And, had not Chandler Bing arrived back from work himself, his face changing from relaxed to alert at the sight of Bob Samuels, their CEO might have left. English. He said, seeing Joanna first, swinging a brown paper grocery bag in her direction. I stopped off in Newtown. Didn't know what tea to get you, so I got them all. Oh. Hello, sir. Chandler, stiffening in Samuel's presence. How is your accommodation for the limb? Asked Bob, smiling at his engineering programmer. Cramped, laughed Chandler. But the explosion did very little real damage to the software and we'll have the hardware up and running by the end of the week. Good, good. I'll hold you to that, Bing. Breaking off, he looked between the two of them for a good half a minute. And I want to thank you, Bing, for enlightening us on aspects of Ms. Lucas's work that we were not aware of. And, turning to Joe, added, I am sorry about your husband. Oh, one more thing, said Bob Samuels, as he had taken a few steps down the hall, before turning back, finger raised as if the one more thing had just occurred to him, then turned his large, round face to Joe. It seems your reputation as a prig is entirely undeserved. Joe felt herself pinking. Thank you, sir, she replied, not knowing what else to say, and then added, and thank you about the promotion. Samuel smiled, then glanced at Chandler. Oh, and by the way, if I knew who had started that rumor, Bing, you might be as well to kick his ass. 88,888,888. The talk came. Once Bob Samuels had finally left, he and Joe closed the door to the apartment, instructing her to rest, as per hospital instructions, and cooked a casserole from scratch in Mrs. Robertson's meatloaf dish. Thank you, said Joe, as she bit into a piece of it, an hour later, the hot potato hurting her throat as she ate. It was only once they had finished and she had insisted she wash up that, from the sink, asked him, so, are you going to kick your own ass, Chandler? What? He turned from the sofa, frowning deeply, putting down his local newspaper. I heard you, she continued, putting down the dishcloth. The morning of the night of the explosion, I came up that morning and I heard what you said to Andy Waterman and… Yes, he said, looking down. Look, leave that, why don't you? I think we need to talk about a few things. Joe crossed over the floor, not sitting immediately, but instead folded her arms in front of her, though felt a little mean about it considering the dinner he had just made for her. Then she gingerly sat on the floor, her back against the settee, refolding her arms. Chandler slid down next to her. Can you explain why it is that a police officer told me that it was Steve Silverman was the one who got me out? And, she added, a part of her feeling really bad, you were drinking? Chandler shifted uncomfortably next to her, although it was probably the hardness of the floor. What's going on, Chandler? She said, when he had said nothing. Is it something I said? Or did? No, it's not you, it's me. Classic, thought Joe, trying to look calm but feeling actually rather angry at being fobbed off with that old chestnut. Do you want to talk to me about it? Chandler got to his feet and strode towards his room. Joe turned to see the back of him retreat, but then her work colleague turned back and stared at her for a moment, before stepping away from the sofa, turning his back, and putting a hand over his mouth for a second, clearly agitated. Here it comes, Joe thought. Be brave. It's only 4 more days till she could use her first-class ticket home, which Bob had so kindly given to her, and if she called Continental, she was sure Jeff Stevens would know of somewhere she could go till then, or out her on to someone who would, and then. I miss her, Joanna, Chandler said simply. Monica. I still love her, and I always will. We met up when I went to see Jack at his premiere performance. It was like old times, no awkwardness, no bitterness there. She was wearing the earrings I gave her for Christmas. That would do it, thought Joe. I love her so much, you know? But she's marrying Richard. He paced the floor behind the sofa. I never stopped loving her. Then, he leaned over to Joe, who was craning her neck up at him, and then swung himself down beside her, as the burden of the confession was gone from him. Look, I didn't want to say anything to the police. I've been going through a bad patch, a terrible patch, for a long time. It started way back, before we broke up, gotta be over 10 years ago. He looked away, but didn't stop speaking. I was on my way to work, and one day, I wasn't sober enough to drive to work, and I hit 2 people, I nearly killed them. And you think I could stop myself? When Chandler turned back there were tears in his eyes. I was an alcoholic then, I still am if I drink for the wrong reasons. If only I could turn back the clock and get our years back. But now. You could get back together, Chandler, said Joe, soothingly, rubbing his shoulder. You could tell her how you feel. I already did, he interrupted. Our lives are so different now, even if we wanted to get back together we have grown apart. Too many things have changed, even my office. I liked my office, Joe. No, I'll get a transfer somewhere else while they get the building sorted. My life seems to be here, in Newtown, North Dakota. He looked across to Joe, whose eyes were beginning to grow weary and who was on the verge of calling it a night whether Chandler had finished or not. I'm sorry for how I behaved to you, Joanna Lucas, he said. I kick my own ass in the morning. 88,888,888. So, said Joey, who had called Chandler from the lyric at the end of The Cursed Child that evening. How's it all going? You hero, you. The English PR Joanna, he corrected himself quickly. She's gone back to bed. Stupid thing said she'd be going into work tomorrow, though what use she will be still so battered after what we went through. She got herself promoted though, now that her boss got himself blown up. He called it, Joe, Chandler added. You got her out, interrupted Chandler, stiffly. She'd been working late, too late and I came to get her. She shares my work apartment, remember? No you didn't, say, Joey replied, though he knew that he knew already as he had spoken to Joanna. No, agreed Chandler. And I didn't get her out at the time it mattered. But I would have, if I had not been. Been what? Asked Joey, who knew the answer anyway. Worse for wear. Anyway, it's only for another 2 more days. Then she's going home, continued Joey. How are you feeling about that? I'll miss her, said Chandler, simply. Then, changing the subject, asked, have you seen Monica recently? No, not recently, Joey replied. But you know she's not marrying Richard anymore? Chandler? He added, when his friend had not spoken for what felt like a long time. Oh. That's all Chandler Bing could think to say, but he could feel the elation begin to permeate his entire body, like a weight had been lifted from his chest, and excitement began to buzz through every one of his nerves. And Jack is going good? Yeah, listen, said Joey, Jack's impressed the management in London with his performance. He had a conference call with his role's actor and he aced it. He's going to England to play his part, and understudy for Albus Severus's role. Wow, that's great! Exclaimed Chandler, though. London, Joe? Well, no, not exactly. They're opening the play in Manchester and he is going to be leading some of the rehearsals. Well, put him on, will you, Joe? At the other end of the line, Joey Tribbiani shook his head. Can't. He got off just before I called you. But he can call you tomorrow. Could you pretend you don't know? He's really excited to tell you. When his Uncle Joey had put down the phone, Jack Bing glared at his godfather, waiting. You called her? Mom? Jack asked, pulling on his trousers ready for the Friday matinee. Yes. And you called Dad? Joey looked at him, nodding. Like you heard. And I didn't get much of a chance to talk to him about Monica. This explosion is pretty serious, Jack, both of them could have died in there. Well, perhaps it would be better if it had been the English brig. He snapped, pulling on his own trousers, stretching out his arms at the shoulder, one by one. Hey, that's no way to speak about anybody. Chandler chided, handing Jack his shoes. Mom and Dad would have got back together, he replied, combing gel through his white blonde hair. Dad could be here, in New York, not some hick town a day's drive away. There's no guarantee of that, Jack. You can never tell what the future will be like. Well, they would have, Jack continued, forcefully, pulling on his coat in the dim dressing room light, a jangle of keys hinting that the caretaker wanted them out as fast as possible. He would be alone and she could tell him what she wanted to tell him at Christmas. Which was what? Asked Joey, dismissively, getting to his feet. But, what Jack was about to say made him stop, and turn in astonishment. That she loved him and wanted to make another go of things.